Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. This is Episode 7, Book 1, and I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. When Tom Sawyer, Joe Harper, and Huckleberry Finn traipse into their own funeral service, of course, everyone is amazed and surprised and thankful. But is life all smooth now that the boys have returned safely? Of course not. Somehow, Tom always gets into a scrape. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Chapter 18. But there was no hilarity in the little town that tranquil Saturday afternoon. The Harpers and Aunt Polly's family were being put into mourning with great grief and many tears. An unusual quiet possessed the village, although it was ordinarily quiet enough in all conscience. The villagers conducted their concerns with an abstracted air, and talked little, but they sighed often. The Saturday holiday seemed a burden to the children. They had no heart in their sports and gradually gave them up. In the afternoon, Becky Thatcher found herself moping about the deserted schoolhouse yard and feeling very melancholy. But she found nothing there to comfort her. She soliloquized, "Oh, if I only had his brass andiron knob again! But I haven't got anything now to remember him by." And she choked back a little sob. Presently she stopped and said to herself, "It was right here. Oh, if it was to do over again, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it for the whole world, but he's gone now. I'll never, never, never see him any more." This thought broke her down, and she wandered away with the tears rolling down her cheeks. Then quite a group of boys and girls, playmates of Tom's and Joe's, came by, and stood looking over the paling fence, talking in reverent tones of how Tom did so-and-so the last time they saw him, and how Joe said this and that small trifle, pregnant with awful prophecy as they could easily see now. And each speaker pointed out the exact spot where the lost lad stood at the time, and then added something like, "And I was standing just as I am now, and as if you was him, I was as close as that, and he smiled just this way, and then something seemed to go all over me like awful, you know, and I never thought what it meant, of course, but I can see now." Then there was a dispute about who saw the dead boys last in life, and many claimed that dismal distinction and offered evidences more or less tampered with by the witness. And when it was ultimately decided who did see the departed last and exchanged the last words with them, the lucky parties took upon themselves a sort of sacred importance, and were gaped at and envied by all the rest. One poor chap who had no other grandeur to offer said with tolerably manifest pride in the remembrance, "Well, Tom Sawyer, he licked me once." But that bid for glory was a failure. Most of the boys could say that, and so that cheapened the distinction too much. The group loitered away, still recalling memories of the lost heroes in odd voices. When the Sunday school hour was finished the next morning, the bell began to toll, instead of ringing in the usual way. It was a very still Sabbath, and the mournful sound seemed in keeping with the musing hush that lay upon nature. The villagers began to gather, loitering a moment in the vestibule to converse in whispers about the sad event. But there was no whispering in the house, only the funereal rustling of dresses as the women gathered to their seats disturbed the silence there. None could remember when the little church had been so full before. There was finally a waiting pause, an expectant dumbness, and then Aunt Polly entered, followed by Sid and Mary, and then by the Harper family, all in deep black, and the whole congregation, the old minister as well, rose reverently and stood until the mourners were seated in the front pew. There was another communing silence, broken at intervals by muffled sobs, And then the minister spread his hands abroad and prayed. A moving hymn was sung, and the text followed, "I am the resurrection and the life." As the service proceeded, the clergyman drew such pictures of the graces, the winning ways, and the rare promise of the lost lads that every soul there, thinking he recognized these pictures, felt a pang in remembering that he had persistently blinded himself to them always before, and had as persistently seen only the flaws and faults in the poor boys. The minister related many a touching incident in the lives of the departed, which illustrated their sweet, generous natures, and the people could easily see, now, how noble and beautiful these episodes were, and remembered with grief that at the time they occurred they had seemed rank rascalities, well deserving the cowhide. The congregation became more and more moved as the pathetic tale went on, till at last the whole company broke down and joined the weeping mourners in a chorus of anguished sobs, the preacher himself giving way to his feelings, and crying in the pulpit. There was a rustle in the gallery which nobody noticed. A moment later the church door creaked. The minister raised his streaming eyes above his handkerchief and stood transfixed. First one and then another pair of eyes followed the minister's, and then, almost with one impulse, the congregation rose and stared, while the 3 dead boys came marching up the aisle, Tom in the lead, Joe next, and Huck, a ruin of drooping rags, sneaking sheepishly in the rear. They had been hid in the unused gallery, listening to their own funeral sermon. Aunt Polly, Mary, and the Harpers threw themselves upon their restored ones, smothered them with kisses, and poured out thanksgivings, while poor Huck stood abashed and uncomfortable, not knowing exactly what to do or where to hide from so many unwelcoming eyes. He wavered and started to slink away, but Tom seized him and said, "Aunt Polly, it ain't fair. Somebody's got to be glad to see Huck." "And so they shall. I'm glad to see him, poor motherless thing." And the loving attentions Aunt Polly lavished upon him were the one thing capable of making him more uncomfortable than he was before. Suddenly the minister shouted at the top of his voice, "Praise God, from whom all blessings flow! Sing and put your hearts in it." And they did. Old Hundred swelled up with a triumphant burst, and while it shook the rafters, Tom Sawyer the pirate looked around upon the envying juveniles about him, and confessed in his heart that this was the proudest moment in his life. As the souled congregation trooped out, they said they would almost be willing to be made ridiculous again, to hear Old Hundred sung like that once more. Tom got more cuffs and kisses that day, according to Aunt Polly's varying moods, than he had earned before in a year, and he hardly knew which expressed the most gratefulness to God and affection for himself. Chapter 19. That was Tom's great secret, the scheme to return home with his brother pirates and attend their own funerals. They had paddled over to the Missouri shore on a log at dusk on Saturday, landing 5 or 6 miles below the village. They had slept in the woods at the edge of town till nearly daylight, and had then crept through back lanes and alleys and finished their sleep in the gallery of the church, among a chaos of invalid benches. At breakfast Monday morning, Aunt Polly and Mary were very loving to Tom and very attentive to his wants. There was an unusual amount of talk. In the course of it, Aunt Polly said, "Well, I don't say it wasn't a fine joke, Tom, to keep everybody suffering most a week so you boys had a good time, but it is a pity you could be so hard-hearted as to let me suffer so. If you could come over on a log to your own funeral, you could have come over and given me a hint some way that you weren't dead but only run off." "Yes, you could have done that, Tom," said Mary, "and I believe you would have if you had thought of it." "Would you, Tom?" said Aunt Polly, her face lighting wistfully. "Say now, would you, if you'd have thought of it?" "Well, I don't know. 'Twould have spoiled everything." "Tom, I hoped you loved me that much," said Aunt Polly with a grieved tone that discomforted the boy. "It would have been something if you'd cared enough to think of it, even if you didn't do it." "Now, Auntie, that ain't any harm," pleaded Mary. "It's only Tom's giddy way. He is always in such a rush that he never thinks of anything." "More's the pity. Sid would have thought, and Sid would have come and done it too. Tom, you'll look back some day when it's too late and wish you'd cared a little more for me when it would have cost you so little." "Now, Auntie, you know I do care for you," said Tom. "I'd know it better if you acted more like it." "I wish now I'd thought," said Tom with a repentant tone. "But I had dreamed about you anyway. That's something, ain't it?" "It ain't much. A cat does that much, but it's better than nothing." "What did you dream?" "Why, Wednesday night I dreamt that you was sitting over there by the bed and Sid was sitting by the woodbox and Mary next to him." "Well, so we did. So we always do. I'm glad your dreams could take that much trouble about us." "And I dreamt that Joe Harper's mother was here." "Why, she was here. Did you dream any more?" "Oh, lots, but it's so dim now." "We'll try to recollect, can't you?" "Somehow it seems to me that the wind blowed the... Try harder, Tom. The wind did blow something. Come." Tom pressed his fingers on his forehead an anxious minute, and then said, I've got it now. It blowed the candle." "Mercy on us! Go on, Tom, go on." "And it seemed to me that you said, 'Why, I believe that door—'" "Go on, Tom." "Let me just study just a moment. Oh, yes, you said you believed the door was open." "As I'm sitting here, I did, didn't I, Mary? Go on." And then, well, I won't be certain, but it seems like as if you made Sid go and, well, what did I make him do, Tom? What did I make him do?" "You made him, you made him shut it." "Well, for the land's sake, I never heard the beat of that in all my days. Don't tell me there ain't anything in dreams any more. Sir Annie Harper should know of this before I'm an hour older. I'd like to see her get around this with her rubbish about superstition. Go on, Tom." "Oh, it's all getting just as bright as day now. Next you said I weren't bad, only mischievous and harum-scarum, and not any more responsible than I think it was a colt or something. And so it was. Well, goodness gracious, go on, Tom." "And then you began to cry." So I did, and not for the first time neither. And then Mrs. Harper, she began to cry and said Joe was just the same, and she wished she hadn't whipped him for taking cream when she'd throwed it out herself." "Tom, the Spirit was upon you. You was a-prophesying, that's what you was doing. Land alive, go on, Tom." "Then Sid said, he said—" "I don't think I said anything," said Sid. "Yes, you did, Sid," said Mary. "Shut your heads and let Tom go on. What did he say, Tom?" I think he said he hoped I was better off where I was gone to, but if I'd been better sometimes—" "There! Do you hear that? It was his very words." "And you shut him up sharp." "I lay I did. There must have been an angel there. There was an angel there somewheres. And Mrs. Harper told about Joe scaring her with a firecracker, and you told about Peter and the painkiller. Just as true as I live. And there was a whole lot of talk about dragging the river for us, and about having the funeral Sunday. And then you and old Mrs. Harper hugged and cried, and she went. It happened just so, as sure as I'm a-sitting in these very tracks. Tom, you couldn't have told it more like if you'd seen it. And then what happened? Go on, Tom." "Then I thought you prayed for me, and I could see and hear every word you said, and you went to bed, and I was so sorry that I wrote on a piece of sycamore bark, 'We ain't dead, we're only off being pirates,' and put it on the table by the candle. And then you looked so good laying there asleep that I went over and leaned over and kissed you on the lips." "Did you, Tom, did you? I forgive you everything for that." And she seized the boy in a crushing embrace that made him feel like the guiltiest of villains. "It was very kind, even though it was only a dream," Sid soliloquized just audibly. "Shut up, Sid. A body does the same in a dream as he'd do if he was awake. Here's a big millum apple I've been saving for you, Tom, if you was ever found again. Now go along to school. I'm thankful to the good God and Father of us all I've got you back, that's long-suffering and merciful to them that believe on him and keep his words, though goodness knows I'm unworthy of it. But if only the worthy ones got his blessings and had his hand to help them over the rough places, there's few enough that would smile here or ever enter into his rest when the long night comes. Go along, Sid, Mary. Tom, take yourselves off. You've hindered me long enough." The children left for school, and the old lady to call on Mrs. Harper, and vanquish her realism with Tom's marvelous dream. Sid had better judgment than to utter the thought that was in his mind as he left the house. It was this: "Pretty thin, as long a dream as that, without any mistakes in it." What a hero Tom was become now! He did not go skipping and prancing, but moved with a dignified swagger as became a pirate who felt the public eye was on him. And, indeed, it was. He tried not to seem to see the looks and hear the remarks as he passed along, but they were food and drink to him. Smaller boys than himself flocked at his heels, as proud to be seen with him and tolerated by him, as if he had been the drummer at the head of a procession, or the elephant leading a menagerie into town. Boys of his own size pretended not to know he had ever been away at all, but they were consuming with envy nevertheless. They would have given anything to have that swarthy, sun-tanned skin of his, and his glittering notoriety, and Tom would not have parted with either for a circus. At school, the children made so much of him and Joe, and delivered such eloquent admiration from their eyes, that the two heroes were not long in becoming insufferably stuck up. They began to tell their adventures to hungry listeners, but they only began. It was not a thing likely to have an end, with imaginations like theirs to furnish material. And finally, when they got out their pipes and went serenely puffing around, the very summit of glory was reached. Tom decided that he could be independent of Becky Thatcher now. Glory was sufficient. He would live for glory. Now that he was dignified, maybe she would be wanting to make up. Well, let her. She should see that he could be as indifferent as some other people. Presently, as she arrived, Tom pretended not to see her. He moved away and joined a group of boys and girls and began to talk. Soon he observed that she was tripping gaily back and forth with flushed face and dancing eyes, pretending to be busy chasing schoolmates and screaming with laughter when she made a capture, but he noticed that she always made her captures in his vicinity, and that she seemed to cast a conscious eye in his direction at such times too. It gratified all the vicious vanity that was in him, and so, instead of winning him, it only set him up the more, and made him the more diligent to avoid betraying that he knew she was about. Presently, she gave over skylarking and moved irresolutely about, sighing once or twice, and glancing furtively and wistfully toward Tom. Then she observed that Tom was now talking more particularly to Amy Lawrence than to anyone else. She felt a sharp pang and grew disturbed and uneasy at once. She tried to go away, but her feet were treacherous and carried her to the group instead. She said to a girl almost at Tom's elbow with sham vivacity, "Why, Mary Austin, you bad girl, why didn't you come to Sunday school?" "I did come, didn't you see me?" "Why, no, where did you sit?" "I was in Miss Peters' class, where I always go. I saw you." "Did you? Well, it's funny I didn't see you. I wanted to tell you about the picnic." "Oh, that's jolly. Who's going to give it?" "My ma's going to let me have one." "Oh, goody, I hope she'll let me come." "Well, she will. The picnic's for me, and she'll let anybody come that I want, and I want you." "That's ever so nice. When is it going to be?" "By and by, maybe about vacation." "Oh, won't it be fun? Are you going to have all the girls and boys?" "Yes, everyone that's friends to me or wants to be." And she glanced ever so furtively at Tom, but he talked right along to Amy Lawrence about the terrible storm on the island, and how the lightning tore the great sycamore tree all to flinders while he was standing within 3 feet of it. "Oh, may I come?" said Gracie Miller. "Yes." "And me?" said Sally Rogers. "Yes." "And me too?" said Susie Harper. "And Joe?" "Yes." And so on with clapping of joyful hands till all the group had begged for invitations but Tom and Amy. Then Tom turned coolly away, still talking, and took Amy with him. Becky's lips trembled, and the tears came to her eyes. She hid these signs with a forced gaiety, and went on chattering. But the life had gone out of the picnic now, and out of everything else. She got away as soon as she could and hid herself, and had what her sex call a good cry. Then she sat moody with wounded pride till the bell rang. She roused up now with a vindictive cast in her eye, and gave her plaited tails a shake, and said she knew what she'd do. At recess, Tom continued his flirtation with Amy, with jubilant self-satisfaction, and he kept drifting about to find Becky and lacerate her with the performance. At last he spied her, but there was a sudden falling of his mercury. She was sitting cosily on a little bench behind the schoolhouse, looking at a picture book with Alfred Temple, and so absorbed were they, and their heads so close together over the book, that they did not seem to be conscious of anything in the world besides. Jealousy ran red-hot through Tom's veins. He began to hate himself for throwing away the chance Becky offered for a reconciliation. He called himself a fool, and all the hard names he could think of. He wanted to cry with vexation. Amy chattered happily along as they walked, for her heart was singing, but Tom's tongue had lost its function. He did not hear what Amy was saying, and whenever she paused expectantly, he could only stammer an awkward assent, which was as often misplaced as otherwise. He kept drifting to the rear of the schoolhouse again and again to sear his eyeballs with the hateful spectacle there. He could not help it, and it maddened him to see, as though he thought he saw, that Becky Thatcher never once suspected that he was even in the land of the living. But she did see, nevertheless, and she knew she was winning her fight too, and was glad to see him suffer as she had suffered. Amy's happy prattle became intolerable. Tom hinted at things he had to attend to, things that must be done, and time was fleeting, but in vain the girl chirped on. Tom thought, "Oh, hang her! Ain't I ever going to get rid of her?" At last he must be attending to those things. She said artlessly that she would be around when school let out, and he hastened away, hating her for it. Any other boy, Tom thought, grating his teeth, any boy in the whole town but that St. Louis smarmy, thinks he dresses so fine in his aristocracy. Oh, all right, I licked you the first time you ever saw this town, mister, and I'll lick you again. You just wait till I catch you out, all taken. And he went through the motions of thrashing an imaginary boy, pummeling the air and kicking and gouging. "Oh, you do you? You holler enough, do you? Now then, let that learn you." And so the imaginary flogging was finished to his satisfaction. Tom fled home at noon. His conscience could not endure any more of Amy's grateful happiness, and his jealousy could bear no more of the other distress. Becky resumed her picture inspections with Alfred, but as the minutes dragged along and no Tom came to suffer, her triumph began to cloud and she lost interest. Gravity and absent-mindedness followed, and then melancholy. 2 or 3 times she pricked up her ear at a footstep, but it was a false hope. No Tom came. At last she grew entirely miserable, and wished she hadn't carried it so far, when poor Alfred, seeing he was losing her, he did not know how, kept exclaiming, "Oh, here's a jolly one! Look at this!" She lost patience and said, "Oh, don't bother me, I don't care for them," and burst into tears and got up and walked away. Alfred dropped alongside and was going to try and comfort her, but she said, "Go away and leave me alone, can't you? I hate you." So the boy halted, wondering what he could have done, for she had said she would look at pictures all through the nooning, and she walked on, crying. Then Alfred went musing into the deserted schoolhouse. He was humiliated and angry. He easily guessed his way to the truth. The girl had simply made a convenience of him to vent her spite on Tom Sawyer. He was far from hating Tom the less when this thought occurred to him. He wished there was some way to get that boy into trouble without much risk to himself. Tom's spelling book fell under his eye. Here was his opportunity. He gratefully opened to the lesson for the afternoon and poured ink upon the page. Becky, glancing in at a window behind him at the moment, saw the act and moved on without discovering herself. She started homeward now, intending to find Tom and tell him. Tom would be thankful and their troubles be healed. Before she was halfway home, however, she had changed her mind. The thought of Tom's treatment of her when she was talking about her picnic came scorching back and filled her with shame. She resolved to let him get whipped on the damaged spelling book's account, and to hate him forever into the bargain. Chapter 20. Tom arrived at home in a dreary mood, and the first thing his aunt said to him showed him that he had brought his sorrows to an unpromising market. "Tom, I've a notion to skin you alive." "Auntie, what have I done?" "Well, you've done enough. Here I go over to Serene Harper's like an old softy, expecting I'm going to make her believe all that rubbish about that dream, when lo and behold, she'd found out from Joe that you was over here and heard all the talk we had that night, Tom. I don't know what's to become of a boy that will act like that. It makes me feel so bad to think you could let me go to Serene Harper and make such a fool of myself and never say a word." This was a whole new aspect of the thing. His smartness of the morning had seemed to Tom a good joke before, and very ingenious. It merely looked mean and shabby now. He hung his head and could not think of anything to say for a moment. Then he said, "Oh, Aunt, I wish I hadn't done it, but I didn't think." "Oh, child, you never think. You never think of anything but your own selfishness. You could think to come all the way over here from Jackson's Island in the night to laugh at our troubles, and you could think to fool me with a lie about a dream, but you couldn't ever think to pity us and save us from sorrow." "Auntie, I know now it was mean, but I didn't mean to be mean. I didn't, honest. And besides, I didn't come over here to laugh at you that night." "What did you come for, then?" "It was to tell you not to be uneasy about us because we hadn't got drownded. Tom, I would be the thankfullest soul in this world if I could believe you ever had as good a thought as that. But you know you never did. And I know it, Tom." Indeed, I did, Auntie. I wish I may never stir if I didn't." "Oh, Tom, don't lie, don't do it. It only makes things 100 times worse." "It ain't a lie, Auntie, it's the truth. I wanted to keep you from grieving. That was all that made me come. I'd give the whole world to believe that. It would cover up a power of sins, Tom. I'd most be glad you'd run off and acted so bad. But it ain't reasonable, because why didn't you tell me, child?" "Why, you see, Auntie, when you got to talking about the funeral, I just got all full of the idea of our coming and hiding in the church, and I couldn't somehow bear to spoil it. So I just put the bark back in my pocket and kept mum." "What bark?" "The bark I had wrote on to tell you we'd gone pirating. I wish now you'd waked up when I kissed you, I do, honest." The hard lines in his aunt's face relaxed, and sudden tenderness dawned in her eyes. "Did you kiss me, Tom?" "Why, yes, I did." "Are you sure you did, Tom?" "Why, yes, I did, Auntie, certain sure." "What did you kiss me for, Tom?" "Because I loved you so, and you laid there moaning, and I was so sorry." The words sounded like truth. The old lady could not hide a tremor in her voice when she said, "Kiss me again, Tom, and be off with you to school now, and don't bother me any more." The moment he was gone, she ran to a closet and got out the ruin of a jacket which Tom had gone pirating in. Then she stopped with it in her hand and said to herself, "No, I don't dare. Poor boy, I reckon he's lied about it, but it's a blessed, blessed lie. There's such comfort in it. I know the Lord will forgive him because it was so good-hearted in him to tell it. But I don't want to find out it's a lie. I won't look." She put the jacket away and stood by musing a minute. Twice she put out her hand to take the garment again, and twice she refrained. Once more she ventured, and this time she fortified herself with the thought, "It's a good lie. It's a good lie. I won't let it grieve me." So she sought the jacket pocket. A moment later she was reading Tom's piece of bark through flowing tears and saying, "I could forgive the boy now if he'd committed 1,000,000 sins." This is your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to the adventures of Tom Sawyer. You can find a link to our podcast on the Marshall Public Library webpage, www.marshallpl.org. I'll talk to you again soon.